Welcome to another episode of the Academy of Influence, the podcast where we talk about the powers of communication and leadership and how by developing it can improve your personal and professional lives. And this week we have a very special guest. This person is a South African of Indian descent who has spent 4.5 years living in China. He is a current high school teacher who came from a law background, and I've come to know him as a very charismatic leader. And in this episode, we spoke in depth about his journey into the areas of leadership and how he grew as a leader, and also how important it is to have a people's first approach. Now, without further ado, let's dive right into the episode. Thank you so much for coming on the show, Fabian.
Yeah, it's cool to be here, man. First time on a podcast. This is a pretty cool experience. Thanks for having me.
So, we actually met in Toastmasters, and Toastmasters is a place where leaders are made. So, I want to start by asking you, how did you end up in Toastmasters and what is your definition of leadership?
Yeah, I remember the first time I met you actually, because in Toastmasters, you get very different types of people. And I always saw people who were very serious about Toastmasters. Now, you get two kinds of serious. You get people who are very into it, and then you get people who are very into it, but also rigid from my own personal experience. So when I met you, I was like, this is a cool guy. So I remember you were definitely like a new angle of Toastmaster people that I've met. So that was cool. But the first time I joined was actually in 2020. So I worked with kids, like small kids at the time. So it was a bit of a change in career path for me. Actually enjoy it. But at a point, I
Mhm.
realized this is not stimulating my mind. When you're teaching apple, it gets a bit, it gets a bit mind numbing sometimes. One of my colleagues at that school, her name was Lana. She's from Canada. And she mentioned one day at a function, she's, hey, I'm part of Toastmasters. Do you know it? And I'm like, yeah, I used to be part of Toastmasters in South Africa. And
Mhm.
then she's, okay, just come to a meeting. She goes to a club called DPS. I'm like, what is DPS? And it all started from there. I went the next Tuesday and I've been stuck there ever since, like nearly 4 years now.
And now you are also the president of this club, DPS, Diamond Professional Speakers.
Yeah.
And as the president and the leader of the club, what is your definition of leadership?
That's an interesting question actually, because my vision of it has actually changed a lot in the last few months. So I've been in leadership positions before, but this is my first time where it's like top of the rung. And so when I first joined, I thought, okay, I'm going to have to really make decisions all the time. And I'm going to have to really run the show a lot more. And very quickly, I realized that does not need to be the case at all. So my idea of leadership right now is really supporting people to reach their own potential. So even though Toastmasters is a nonprofit organization, it still gives people the opportunity to practice professional skills. So like whether you're in charge of the marketing of the club or the membership of the club, people have these opportunities to do things that they can transfer into their professional life. And so my job as president became not overseeing them all the time, but being more of a support mechanism. And it's not actually a lazy way out because for me personally, I can be a bit of a control freak by nature. So it actually is very difficult for me sometimes. Even if something is not the way I want it to be, I have to be like, okay, let go. They got the job
Mhm.
done. They're giving their best shot, and that's what it's about. They're there to learn and develop themselves. And I think that's what my job is to be as a leader. So leadership is about helping people reach their potential, not always forcing my vision onto other people.
Actually, I think one term that I might add in is also a leader is also a facilitator.
Yeah,
You facilitate things to happen instead of just commanding or giving orders and putting people to action.
yeah.
We actually facilitate, we create conditions in which people can perform and convey and to thrive.
Even with that being said, though, leadership, I've noticed recently that leadership, as much as I agree with you about it being about facilitation, there are unfortunately those times where you do have to step in and be like, okay, this ultimately is the vision. Because if we wanted to mirror and reflect like a professional organization, you do need to ultimately have the vision. So when you have your officer
Mhm.
team at the beginning, yeah, we all are going in the same direction, but inevitably when you work with other people, there will be detours by people. So you do need
Mm,
to step in and be like, hey, let's get back onto the road together into the single lane. And when people deviate purposefully, you do have to be a bit more direct and be like, hey, this is the organization, align yourself with it. So that can be the unfortunate part because Toastmasters, of course, is a nonprofit, as we said. And so to
mhm,
have that kind of firmness can be uncomfortable sometimes. Because in a professional or business environment, it's very natural because that has to be
mhm,
done, right? But in Toastmasters, because as you said, it's a community place, it does have its moments where that can be uncomfortable, but it still has to be
mhm,
done. And then you have to switch over from facilitation and wear a different cap for a
mhm.
day or two.
So, was that a transition for you, or were you aware that you had to switch hats along the way?
I was always the confrontational type. So I often use this example when I was working in one of my earlier jobs in South Africa. I was
Mm,
managing like a group of about 20 attorneys or so from around the world. And there was one guy who came in and he was from the UK and he had a lot of experience in the legal background. He worked for like really big names. So when we got his resume, I went to my boss and I was like, I can't, how am I going to manage this guy? I'm like in my early 20s. Yeah, I'm
mhm,
qualified. I'm confident with what I do, but I'm looking at his resume and this guy is like nearly my dad's age and he's super
mhm,
experienced. But long story short, when he came in, actually, his work was of a really low quality. And so I would take it to my boss and I would say, hey, I don't know what to do. And he's like, it's your job. You figure it out. Talk to him, fix it. And so my solution to this was I never called him in. I would try to mentor him, but I never had the guts to tell him, hey, this needs to be redone. So what I would do is every day I would sit with him and mentor him, and
mhm,
after everybody left, I would go to his desk and I'd take all his files and redo them and then sign them off and put them back on his desk for the next morning. And he didn't even care. And now in retrospect, I realize that's really bad leadership. But that's always been my style, like non-confrontational. So like now when it reaches these stages in Toastmasters, it's very uncomfortable for me if that does happen because that never
mhm,
has been my style to have that face to face or like very direct um,
mhm,
confrontational type of is a conflict resolution or any kind of resolution. Uh,
mhm. You brought up a very good example right there. You said that you were in your early 20s and you were given a job to mentor someone that's older than you in the condition that you had never mentored anyone before. Is that correct?
in very minor ways, again, because my jobs in South Africa, because I was so young, I was like a junior the whole time myself. But there were times where I did mentor a couple times before that, but they were always younger than me or around my age.
But were you given training on how to mentor people?
No. And that's actually a very good point that you bring up, actually, because
Mhm,
mentorship is such a delicate psychological balance that you have to strike because you have to take
mhm,
into account people's personalities, right? And also you have to
mhm,
take into account what is actually going to achieve results. Not only results for the company or for yourself as the leader, but also for that person's self development and personal and
mhm,
professional development. So I
mhm,
definitely think mentorship is such an intricate process and without
mhm,
training or training on that for yourself, you're gonna
mhm,
mess up. Oh no, I did not get any training and I never thought about that until now. So thanks for
mhm.
making me reflect on that. And now I'm very angry with my old employer.
When I was president of my club, that was actually my first leadership experience managing a big team.
Mm.
And just like you, I was never given training on how to mentor people. And whenever a conflict or confrontation comes up, I reacted how I always would, which is to avoid confrontation, cease communication. So it wasn't until much later where I reflect on that experience and I realized that's not good. And it gave me a light bulb to ask the question, why were we not taught how to mentor people? So, in your case, what would be a more preferable scenario?
I think it goes back to my first job when I had my first job was as a junior attorney, like serving my articles, law articles, and my desk was directly next to my director, my principal.
Mhm,
And it
mhm,
was a very crazy couple of years. And although I have a lot of respect for her, and I still try to see her whenever I go back to South Africa to visit up until now, it was a very strange experience because I was never taught anything there by her. And it was meant to be the case that I was going to be taught by her. And I learned lots of things just by practice or by other people in the office. But I learned from that first experience before I had my own experiences of having to mentor people that when you do mentor, you are, or when you do need to get mentored, you're not always going to get mentored. So I think already, like if I had to go back, my expectations are already set that it's not always an ideal world. Like even though you need to be prepared, the only way you can
Mhm,
be prepared is by being thrown into the deep end. And I think you
mhm,
just have to be willing to have a people first approach. So I think that's one
mhm,
thing I would change because back then I was very focused on my own career and looking good for myself. So that's why I would
mhm,
take the guy's work and redo it myself. But nowadays I'm like, actually, it's the people that come first. So even in Toastmasters, where I have this experience now, as much as I care about my club growth and the
mhm,
aesthetic of my club and the actual value that my club can give, I'm very much focused on we have paid members who are genuinely excited to be there. And so if
mhm,
they're doing something to the best of their ability and they're finding fulfillment through it, that actually exceeds my expectations. And the other stuff doesn't become less important, but it does become subsidiary to the to their own fulfillment. So that's what I would tell myself if I went back then. First of all, I'd tell myself, don't have any expectations about being mentored because it's not going to happen. It didn't happen in my first job, and I wouldn't expect
mhm,
it to happen even if I went back. It's not that my boss at that time had some psychological defect or something, but it was just because maybe she had never been mentored. And I guess that's the cycle that it goes through. Because who can say they really know how to mentor? I've spoken
mm,
to people who work in psychology, who work in psychiatry, and a lot of it is really based in theory. And when it
mhm,
comes to people problems, like those kind of things like mentorship and psychology, theory differs from person to person. Theory to
mhm,
application is so different. So when you try to have a textbook approach to everybody and try to paint everybody with the same brush, I think that's when it fails. And that's when you have a bigger manifestation of problems. Because then people are
mhm,
like, someone is telling me I need to do this, but they're not taking into account my personal thoughts or my personal experiences. So I think that's a big issue with this kind of thing that people never get enough experience. So they
mhm,
might get textbook experience, if that makes sense to you. They get
mhm,
textbook experience, but they don't get actual experience. So when it comes to the next person that they have to teach, they don't really know
mhm,
how to do it themselves because it
mhm.
only comes with practice that you're actually going to master it.
So would you say because it's very subjective, person to person, where if everyone just learns the textbook method and applies the textbook method, it might be able to cover like the base level problems, but it doesn't really fix the key issue in that particular interaction
Yeah.
or relationship.
Yeah, 100%. It's like opening a book and then like understanding all the chapters by their titles, but not understanding
Mhm,
all the subheadings, the multiple subheadings that go underneath, because every experience is so different to the next. Whatever situation it is, if you have to mentor a new person that comes in, you can't just be like, okay, they're going to be exactly like the last person. If you're mentoring a new president, like I will have to do in the future, like I
mhm,
can't just assume that person has the same experience with leadership that I've had. I can't assume that they know a lot about Toastmasters. I can't assume that their people skills are great. I can't assume that their heart is in the right place. There's so many things that you can't like just assume about someone just because of your experience or just because of other experiences of other people that you've seen.
I want to actually connect that to teaching
Mm,
because you're a teacher right now.
yeah.
And one thing perhaps a lot of people don't know is that I'm actually a teacher as well. But my teaching experience as a teacher since the beginning has always been one to one. So I started teaching when I was 15 years old. And the thing is, like what you said, I was thrown into the deep end of the water at the time. I wasn't given any training. I wasn't taught how to teach. My seniors were just like, hey, you seem like a pretty good guitar player. We need someone to do a substitute class. How about you go in and do it? And I was like, okay, I
Mm,
get paid, so why not? And I just go in without knowing what I was doing and just winged it along the way. And for me, I learned through getting complaints. I learned from getting complaints from students, getting complaints from parents, from students not paying their fees to continue the lessons. I've always been wondering, shouldn't we be given a base level of training on certain subjects? Okay, in school, we learn maths, we learn science, we learn history. Basically, it's a lot of like facts and figure stuff, right?
Yeah.
So, with things like communication, leadership, mentorship, shouldn't those subjects be also included in our education curriculum?
I think it comes back to what I was saying before about my first boss, about there being this perpetual cycle where people who don't know from the past, they're hesitant to carry it forward because, or to try to train people for the first time because they
Mm.
really don't know themselves. Because when I was in high school, we had a subject called life orientation in high school. For us, high school was 8th grade to 12th grade. So we had a subject called life orientation. That was basically where things like mentorship, life skills, collaboration, those kind of things would
Oh,
be
okay.
learned. And actually, in 12th grade, we had one life orientation lesson the entire year. And I went to a really good school, but the school just didn't place any focus on that subject. We were getting grades for it, they were getting sucked out of someone's thumb, but we never had classes for it. And in retrospect, I do think that maybe it's because they didn't really have people who felt qualified to do it. They could have gotten psychologists to come in, but again, the textbook is so different from practice, and I think people realize that as they start dealing with more people. And even when I was, I think, ninth or 10th grade, I was
Mhm.
assigned like a mentorship role in the school. And I just signed up because I wanted a badge to wear every day. It looked pretty cool. But we didn't have any training the entire year. No one ever, literally nothing happened. They gave us a badge and then never heard about it again. So I feel like, again, I went to a good school, and even with a good system in place, they couldn't keep that going. And even when I look at my teaching experience now, I see that there is a general lack of passion for kids' psychological needs, or like
Mhm.
mental needs, because nowadays mental health is such a big thing, not only for adults, but for kids as young as like 8th or 9th grade. You see it like manifesting on a daily basis. It's really crazy to me, but not many people are willing to step up to it. I think there's a few reasons for it. I think firstly, in the Chinese context, I think a lot of parents are very hesitant to admit that there might be an issue. So I have had
Mhm.
some parents who do communicate with me and say that they're aware of it, but most of them are not. And it's not my place to step in and tell a parent that. So in that case, nobody's talking about it. So it's like the elephant in the room. The second
Mhm.
thing is that people don't really have the passion to care that much. So I feel like from my experiences in the education field, teachers want to do a 7 to 5 job, 7 to 4:30 job. And
Mhm.
that's great. And I also wish I had that sometimes. But something I've realized is that I never liked kids back in the day. That's open truth. But nowadays, when I see my kids and I really have a passion for them, and I see that there's this gap that nobody is tapping into, I see what they're stressed out with. I see that they have genuine issues,
Mhm.
and nobody else is stepping up to the plate. And this is
Mhm.
not where I give myself a pat on the back. I assure you, I'm not doing that at all. But I try to always do that. But then it's me doing too much.
Mhm.
And that mentality reflects the whole system, where it's, if you're trying to step in and help a kid out, then it's doing too much. And that system is unbreakable at this point. That's the problem.
So basically, just do your job,
Yeah.
get paid, and just go home.
Yeah. Stop getting too invested.
So actually, I just want to touch on one thing you just brought up because you said mental health is a big issue among kids nowadays, right?
Mm.
And you said that even though it's a very prominent issue, not enough attention is being paid to it. Is that correct?
Yes, 100%.
Would it be fair to say, with my assumption, that there's way too much attention and spotlight placed on tangible results, such as test results,
Yeah.
that they're not willing to put any resources or efforts to look at things that you cannot actually see?
Yeah.
It kind of goes back to what you were saying that in South Africa, you guys have this class called life orientation, right? Like now that you look back, whatever that is being taught in the class is actually really important,
Yeah.
like people skills, mentorship, leadership, communication. But you can't see the immediate value from it. Like having an A in that wouldn't qualify you to become a nuclear scientist. So naturally, I'm guessing that between a chemistry class and a life orientation class, maybe from an education ministry's point of view, they're like, what is our return of investment
Yeah.
in these
Gonna be
two
the
classes? And
gonna
and
be
obviously the like chemistry, physics, and commerce would have more
yeah.
tangible, visible results to the economy or to the nation rather than, like you said, the life orientation class.
Yeah. It's funny you mentioned this because actually this is just an issue I was having this week. So I teach two eighth grade classes. I teach them like English language arts, but then my bigger focus is on ninth and 10th grade. We teach them academic writing, which is like teaching them how to do like university style reports, which is something
Mhm,
we never learned in school. That was only something I did in the university for the first time. But that's how edgy the Chinese system is. They're giving them the kids this edge at this age. So my 10th graders, they're really with the program because it affects their GPAs and they're using it for their university entrance records already. But the
mhm,
ninth graders are getting ready to do their Zhongkao exam soon. You were talking about like subjects where you have an immediate return and there's a future return. And that's exactly what's happening now because I'm teaching academic writing and I'm expecting them to type out 7 pages of an essay about some deep topics like the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Actually, I was grading them this afternoon. They're very intelligent. It's really up to standard, but some of them refuse to. And the reason being what you said before. One of the kids told me last week that the subject is useless to them. And I said, I don't think that's true because in the future, you go to university, this is what you're going to be doing. Whatever industry, whatever field or discipline you're in, academic report, research writing is exactly what you need. And he's, no,
mhm,
but this is not in Zhongkao, so they don't need to focus on it. I said, yeah, it's not
um,
in Zhongkao. I know it's not in Zhongkao, but this is like in 3 or 4 years' time, this is exactly
mhm,
what you're going to be needing. And they're like, no, they don't think that's true. This is the issue. They see what's right in front of them because there's a pressure on those exams and not enough motivation or intrinsic motivation, should I say, to focus on the
mhm,
long term
mhm,
objectives. So a lot of these
right,
kids, they have these big goals and dreams and desires to travel the world, to study at Ivy League universities in the US, etc. But they don't actually understand that in order to get there, you're gonna have to plant the seeds now to reap
mm,
the rewards in the future because they're
yeah.
so ingrained with the idea that you have to focus on the now.
And many years down the line, they'll end up in Toastmasters because they will probably regret not listening to teacher Fabian in the past.
Yeah,
So at least for them, I think they have a choice. Like you said, academic writing is a subject in school. It's just their choice whether they want to focus and be good at it, right?
yeah.
Like for me, when I was growing up, we didn't have any of that. Like in the previous podcast episode, I was mentioning that I was not aware of the importance of communication as a skill and a concept. We communicate every single day, but we're just communicating because we have to. We weren't told to communicate with intention, like how to say, what to say, and how to say it better, how to achieve your goals using these kind of soft skills.
I think that's something that's the more developing countries over the last couple of decades, though the people from there are struggling with that. So I think you see that in China. And as you said,
Mhm,
maybe in Malaysia as well, probably up until now. South Africa is definitely still like that. So there is a slight shift, but there's still that tendency where parents are pushing their kids to, hey, you have to work towards being a doctor, a lawyer, a scientist. And in South Africa, being an engineer is like the end all be all. I think the more Western countries, it's easier for them to get out of that mindset. But
mhm.
for the more developing countries and now even the newly developed countries, it definitely is harder for people to get out of the whiplash of history.
You are from South Africa and you have been living in China for 4.5 years, right?
Yeah, crazy.
Also as a teacher, so you have been in very close contact with a lot of local students here. How would you compare South Africa and China in your point of
Education
view?
or in terms of like general society?
Let's touch on education.
In education, actually, they're quite similar. But the what people need to understand, because I've noticed that even non-Chinese people, like people from any other country outside of South Africa, is actually a very misunderstood country in terms of society structure. So South Africa is a very diverse society. And it's something that we're taught about since we're in like first grade. We always hear South Africa is called a rainbow nation. And it just becomes such a cliche that it loses all its meanings. And so I've never actually thought about it until I moved to China. And then it was like, oh, I get it now. This thing with this rainbow nation thing I've been hearing about for 20 plus years makes sense because South Africa is such a diverse society in terms of culture, religion, and especially race as well. And that is the biggest difference that trickles down into education as well. Because in the education structure there in South Africa, people of different races have different approaches to education. So certain races will actually be like, hey, my child, just try your best. As long as you give it your best shot, we're happy for you. Others, it's like the future of the bloodline depends on you getting a successful top of the class mark in this test or exam and degree. Coming from an Indian background, it's even more intense because it's like, it's competitive as hell. It's like they're always like, it's, oh, this person got this. Why didn't you do it like this? Blah, 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 blah. And it's very stressful, especially in an Indian family. My parents, luckily, were not as bad. I was very blessed with that. But there was still moments where it was like, I remember once in sixth grade, third quarter of sixth grade. I'll never forget. I came out sixth in the grade. I was really happy, and I had a B plus aggregate total. I was the top boy. I'll never forget. And I came home, and my mom still denies this up until this day. I stood outside by her car door, and I told her, and I was a bit disappointed because I didn't get an A. But I was like, "Hey, I came out sixth," and she slapped me across my face. And she denies it up until this day, but it did happen. So that's the kind of culture where it's like very forceful. So each race, each culture has very different approaches in South Africa. The difference in China is that everybody is very competitive. Everybody is vying for that one top spot. So even if kids are doing their best and if they're achieving high grades, if they're not the top student, they're not happy. So even with some of my high school students, when they come in and they want to check their grades on tests or essays or whatever while I'm still grading them, some of them will never even ask for their own one first. They'll ask me, what did the person who come out first get? They'll always ask about that person's grade. Or they'll ask about their one and then they'll ask about that person. It's no, you don't need to know. That's none of your business. Because I don't ever want to feed that monster. Even though we're in the system, I'm not going to feed that personally.
What's their reason for doing that? Is it for themselves or is it to prove to their parents that they have defeated their competition? Because hearing this from you, I can feel the pressure as the student. You are not so concerned about your own results. You're actually concerned if you are better or worse than your competition. And being better or worse will dictate how you feel afterwards.
Yeah. It was about a year ago or so. I was emailing a parent about a kid in class who was like eighth grade and they weren't doing so well. And the father
Mm.
was just like, yeah, it is what it is. You can't really control it. And then I sent a follow up mail and I said, your kid is falling behind from the rest of the class. And then suddenly the father was like, okay, can we set up a meeting, please? Like, how far behind is this kid from the rest of the class? And that's when the improvement actually happened. And that was such a wake up call to me. And I was very annoyed about it at first because I was like, hey, I sent you like a couple of mails before this telling you there's a problem. But I just felt uncomfortable to say that the child is falling behind because that just feels, I wouldn't want to hear that as a parent. But eventually I had to say it. And then that was the wake up call. It's like the competition level is so intense that, again,
Mhm.
even if a kid is getting a 90% in academic writing, if they're not getting 92% or 93% like the top students, it's bad. These
Mhm.
kids are so competitive that they feel that if they get below a 90% or a 92, that they're really bad and that they like flopping the class.
It's really perspective because like what you said, it doesn't really matter how much you score. It's how much you score in relation to others.
Yeah.
So it doesn't matter if you score 99 if everyone else scores 100.
Yeah, no, that's exactly what happens here. And that's quite unfortunate because there's room for human error everywhere. So even like a top student can end up with 99, and a slightly lower end student can end up with 100 technically on a good day, where the universe
Mhm,
has changed the wheel of fortune. So it's not necessarily a reflection of actual intellect, but then it becomes set in stone that is the intellectual standard of each of those students. And that's very
mhm.
problematic, obvious for obvious and multiple reasons.
Yeah. So, with that said, is there anything you would want to do to change or improve this current predicament?
You mean within the Chinese context?
So, I'm an educator, but also at the same time, I'm a service provider. So, I'm very clear about my position as a service provider that I know I have to provide a service to meet an end result. And as long as they're happy, I'm fine. But in your case, I'm not sure if it's the same or different, or if you see education differently than I do. Do you feel like, in your experience, seeing some of these issues in education, does it like ignite some fire in you to want to go on some kind of crusade to improve or change anything at all?
It comes back to what we were talking about earlier about Toastmasters and about the mentorship thing. I think if you have a people's first approach, it changes everything because ultimately teenagers are much like the same with adults or any human of any age where people want to be seen and people want to be heard. The problem is with the teenage demographic right now, there's not a lot of listening going on. From the teachers, parents, anyone of an older age, any elder is not paying enough attention to listening to students. And this is the thing because there's so much going on in their lives. There's so many, especially nowadays, especially in China, actually. Like for teenagers now, when they're so like anywhere else in the world, but more so in China, there's so much of, for the girls, there's TikTok, there's all these beauty standards, there's all the marketing and campaigns that they see, all the K-pop stars that are taking over. The boys are influenced by a very strong sense of toxic masculinity, I feel, in China. And it's because of what they see, maybe in the media and by movies and music. So they're filled with all of insecurities, they're full of questions, and it affects them negatively. And so someone needs to listen to them, to their story. Someone needs to listen to their perspective and make them feel seen. That's something that's so important. And so my job is not to do that, but that's something I definitely take on my shoulder. Like my students, some of them take me up on the offer, but a lot of them don't. But those who do, I always try to keep my door open to, hey, let's talk about anything. Even if it's not about my subject, I don't care. Even if it's not about school, I don't care. Just come and talk to me. Some of them do actually. Some of them who even left the school, actually, they still talk to me. I got a message from someone a few months ago. He's about 15 and he was telling me like he's heartbroken because he broke up with his girlfriend in Singapore. And I was like, man, that sucks. But I was like, it's great that you still think of talking to me about this. So I think that's really, it's really cool to me actually. Maybe that it is a bit of a stretch to be doing that. But I'm actually really happy because I think back to when I was in school and I wasn't the top of the class in math or science. I wasn't an athletic kid, so I was just in the middle and I got lost in the crowd. But there were like two teachers in my whole high school who saw me and saw potential in me, and they gave me extra time, they gave me visibility. And those are the people that made me more confident and willing to try harder and give of my best. So I always want to be that teacher to at least one kid who will remember me for that. And it's not about giving myself a pat on the shoulder. It's about actually making sure that kids come out of this education system with more than textbook knowledge. And I tell my kids all the time, I don't care if you're getting 100% or 95%. Nobody cares about your grades. I don't care about your grades. I don't respect you more because of that. But if you're actually a good kid, that's more important than anything. So I want to be the person who advocates for that. As you said, crusade. I want to be the crusader for that kind of cause.
Going back to leadership, I think leadership is a form of influence.
Yeah.
So you had an influence from your teacher, and now you have taken up that mantle, and you would want to influence whoever takes up your offer on it. So I think the point is not to try and change the world or change everyone. Just spread your message, spread your ideas, you offer that helping hand, and there will be those that take you up for it and those who don't?
But yeah, it definitely is. So I didn't see this for myself, but I was told about this from a few people. There was a student last year who she was new to school, and I won't say exactly what, but she had lots of issues that she was going through. And I would call her into my office and we'd talk about it, and she would cry sometimes and get very emotional.
Yeah.
And then this year, apparently, she made like a Xiao Hongshu video, like a little red
Mhm,
book video, and talking
mhm,
about like how much I helped her with her adaptation to the school because she was new to the school. And it was so touching for me because it was like, okay, now she's come out of the other side, come out from the other side, and now she's spreading her story. And that's what
mhm.
life is about, right? And that's not just a Toastmasters catch line or like structure for speech. That's like
Great.
really like you have your highs and lows, you have your climax, and then it's okay, I
Mhm,
came out from the other side. And now it's like my call to action, my message to you is actually things get better. And that's the
mhm.
universal message. I think that's why it's used in Toastmasters so much because it applies in every circumstance in life. No matter how cheesy it sounds when you talk about it, it is like the most
Okay.
important thing that you people want to know whether it's professionally, relationship wise, career wise. People want to know that okay, there's an issue because everybody goes through issues. There's an issue,
Mhm.
but you can come out of it the other side, and this is what it looks like if you look at me. So it's really great to see that being spread out, as you said. That is very rewarding. Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah. And going back to structure, we started with a question about Toastmasters, and then you just touch on Toastmasters just now to close up the loop. You are a very qualified Toastmasters, my friend. One last question for now.
Yeah,
What's next for you? Would you continue on your journey in education, or do you have any other plans for your next step in life or your career?
it's a great question. So this year I'm turning 30 and it's definitely a checking point like to stop and be like, okay, where am I headed to next? Because I feel like the world is so big. Nowadays most people don't even stick in the industry that they studied in university. So I feel like I never would have ever expected myself to be a teacher. Never in 100 years. Never saw it coming. But it happened and I'm really glad it happened. So I feel like I'm not closing myself up to after opportunities. So right now I'm in the stage where I'm chasing opportunities. Like recently, I think you might be aware, like I sang my own original song in public for the first time. That was like no expectations for it to go anywhere, but it's like you never know. This could be the start of something new. Going in Toastmasters, I was in a meeting last week and I was in a entrepreneurship club meeting, and afterwards, people were coming and asking for my advice about networking and building brand strategies for yourself. And it was in that moment in talking to them that I realized I have a lot of insight on this topic, which I never knew that I had. If I had not been in that position on that Friday night, I would never have realized that. So again, it's about opening yourself up to every opportunity and like never and learning more about yourself. And so with that being said, I don't really know what the future holds. Right now, I'll be honest, I'm just taking everything that comes my way and not saying no to anything. So it's like it's like in a trial run stage for everything in life, even Toastmasters. Because you never know. Life's a long time, but life's a short time too.
Okay, give us one quote or one message that you would like to say to everyone to end the show.
It's something I tell students, something I tell people in my Toastmasters club, something I used to say in my workplace as well, that everybody feels like they're incapable of doing things. Everybody feels inferior when they go into a new environment. And this is a very common saying now, but I believe in fake it till you make it. Because if you
Hmm.
stick it out, you're going to make it. And until then, just look the part, play the part, and pitch up for the part. And until you make it, just fake it till you make it. When it comes to a Toastmaster speech, for example, if you mess up in a contest, nobody knows your script, right? You just keep on moving. You just keep on going with the show because nobody knows. You fake it till you make it. So I
Hmm.
think that's definitely one of the most powerful things that keeps me going on in life. So yeah.
So fake it till you make it. Thanks for coming on to the show, Fabian, and look forward to seeing you sometime soon again.
Yeah, sooner than you think.